A third of global cyber attacks are coming from China, and the number has doubled in a matter of months. New figures have been released in a State of the Internet report as governments worldwide scramble to beef up their online security. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. Welcome to the program. It is ranked as one of the fastest growing areas of crime in the world by Interpol. Cyber criminals are increasingly exploiting the speed, convenience and anonymity of modern technology to target individuals, corporations and governments. And the global nature of the internet means their illegal activities can be carried out virtually anywhere and at any time. Akamai Technologies, which monitors online traffic, says half of all cyber attacks are coming from China, the United States and Russia, with China alone accounting for a third of them. Tarek Bazley has our report.
There are more than 2.4 billion people online, and some are using the technology to hack into the computers of other people, companies or governments. These so-called cyber attacks disrupt computer systems, compromise data, and are estimated to cost global business $380 billion a year. In the third quarter of last year, internet monitoring company Akamai says it recorded cyber attacks from 180 countries. A third of them, it says, came from China. The next worst country, it says, was the United States, where 13% of attacks came from. And Russia is a number 3 spot, generating 4.7% of all attacks. The high number of attacks from China and the US may well be explained by the fact they have the largest online populations. Frequently, though, unlike attackers from other countries, those from China don't bother to hide their origins, making it easier to see from where the attacks are coming. Australia is in the process of setting up a centre to combat cybercrime. Its Prime Minister says cyber attacks cost the country over $1.7 billion last year.
Australia is an attractive target for a range of malicious cyber actors, from politically motivated hackers and criminal networks to nation states. But government alone cannot develop a secure and safe digital environment. We must continue to work closely with industry and international partners to develop a set of global norms for online behaviour. The internet must remain open but also be secure.
Whether the attacks are the result of cyber activists or commercial espionage, it's that balance between an open internet and one that is open to abuse that represents the real challenge for those trying to combat cyber crime. Tarek Bazley for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now to talk more about this are our guests, all in London. British Labour MP Keith Vaz. Keith is the chairman of the UK Parliament's Home Affairs Select Committee. Jason Moon, a technology expert and so-called white hat or ethical hacker. And to round off our panel, Adrian Mars, a technology journalist. Good to have you all with us. Keith Vaz, I want to start with you. How real a threat is cybercrime in your view?
It is a huge threat. That is why my committee started an inquiry into e-crime earlier this year. And for someone who's very much a dinosaur and doesn't know much about new technology, I have been shocked by the extent to which people are using the internet in order to attack countries, attack companies, basically commit online fraud. Half of all the frauds that are committed in the UK are now online. It's increased by over 30% last year. There is a loss to the retail industry of about £205 million last year. So this is serious business. And the United Kingdom has been targeted by many, many countries, but we are first amongst other countries in terms of the attacks that are being made by 25 other countries. They're not individual countries that are attacking us as far as we can see. These are people within those countries. But this is a very serious and very important crime that needs to be combated. We were told by one of our principal witnesses, the commander of the police in the City of London that coordinates these activities, in fact, that he feels that we're losing the war on cybercrime. So we need to pick up our game and make sure that we work with other countries that wish to do what we want to do, which is to combat this increasing level of crime.
What do you
First
think,
of all, of
what do you
course,
think
to find
then,
out why it happens.
What do you think then can be done to combat this? Is your government doing enough in that area?
Well, we haven't finished our inquiry yet. It's some time to go, but I think from the initial evidence that we've received, first of all, we need to make people aware of the crimes that are being committed. I think people just simply don't understand what's happening until it happens to them. I had my credit card hacked into only 3 weeks ago. Until then, I didn't realise how easy it was for people to hack into credit cards and the extent of online fraud in the banking service. I think there needs to be much better cooperation between different countries, but also I think we will study very carefully what the Prime Minister of Australia is doing to see whether or not we can learn from them. Because this is something that you don't need to open a new building or set up a new enterprise for. This can just be done, as far as I could see, with a couple of computers sitting in front of you. So it's an investment in the people, but also the technology rather than the buildings.
Jason Moon, how worried should we be about all this?
Very worried, but if I can just put a caveat in, a kind of reality check. We have to remember a few things about all these statistics. One, which is when you trace where the origin of an attack comes from, it doesn't necessarily equate to the attacker actually being in that country, because it's in the interest of the attacker to obfuscate where they're attacking from, so they bounce their attack around the world. That's not to say that attacks don't come from China, they do, but just bear that in mind. Also, a lot of these statistics, they're way out of whack, but not in the way that you would expect. Cybercrime and hacking is much more rife than is understood by the layperson or politician, that's for sure. Anyone that works in IT security or anything like that, or digital forensics like myself, can testify to that fact. So it's actually there's kind of a game of catch-up being played. Hasn't really hit home yet just how rife this problem is, just how much hacking is going on, both industrial espionage, cybercrime, hacking between governments, fraud. Every single type of hacking and digital fraud is going on to a much greater extent than is realised.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the skepticism that surrounds some of this, which you touched on there. But I want to ask you as well, Jason Moon, a little bit about what you do specifically. You are a self-described white hat or so-called ethical hacker. Just enlighten our viewers a little bit about what it is that you do and what purpose you believe it serves.
Well, it's called white hat hacking. What I do is I test security systems. So I hack into banks or whatever, but I have their permission first to do so. So that's called pen testing. So I basically test and design security systems, find their flaws before they're hacked into in the real world. Also, I do digital forensics, which is investigating an attack after it's taken place, just like you would take fingerprints or whatever. So working with the police and with the lawyers to ascertain how an attack happened, where it originated from, things like that, to gather evidence against the criminal. So that, in a nutshell, that's what I do. So it's firmly from the ethical side. I've witnessed firsthand what hacking does. I mean, this is the thing about hacking. I mean, hacking damages real lives. I mean, we live in a kind of the social networking generation right now, but where everyone's kind of connected and can network up and socialize with each other. But are they really? Because they're doing it over a computer. We're also kind of breeding almost a sociopathic generation. It's so easy for a hacker to press a button on a computer. Like the guy said, you only need a couple of computers. You can hack someone on the other side of the world. I mean, you do real damage to that person, emotionally, financially. It can be catastrophic to another human being, to a real person. There's this kind of disconnect, and it's really worrying. So hacking is definitely more on the uprise at the moment. And I think it's not just a technological issue, it's a social issue as well. That this could be part of the reason, I think. People just don't really realise or make that connection that there's another human being on the end of this attack.
Adrian Mars, what is your take on all of this? Do we need to be a lot more vigilant than we currently are about cyber attacks?
There's no question, and the systems that protect us are in many ways broken. Passwords, for example, just don't work very well. because people
That's true.
tend to reuse the same password. So a recent survey, for example, found 69% of Americans reuse their password, and that's disastrous. Just in the last 2 years, we've seen well over a dozen very large breaches of passwords, and of course, once they get one password, if that's the same as your email password, then the hacker has access to your email, and they only have to go to another website and say, I've lost my password. The website sends a link to your email that uses that as proof that you're you. So the password system isn't really working. The identity system, the way you can be sure that a website is owned by the people who say it is, isn't really understood by users. This is a system of cryptographic digital certificates issued by people we should be able to trust. But those people, so-called trusted third parties, have been breached an awful lot. And just basic precautions aren't taken by very large companies. So, for example, if you ever contact a company to say, what's my password, and they're able to tell you, they're clearly doing something wrong, because basic good protection involves not storing actual passwords, just storing, in fact, something called a hash, which from which you can check a password matches, but you can't generate the password from the hash. It's a clever mathematical technique.
You've hit the
and that
you've
is
totally
that's
hit the
often
nail.
not widely used.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
You've totally hit the he's totally hit the nail on the head there. I mean, this is the problem that we professionals face. The entire password paradigm, which is what we're currently using, should not be being used. It's all been built on that, so we're kind of in this state of affairs where we're kind of stuck with it, and no one wants to kind of start from the ground up, but we almost need to do that, because we've built so much on the password paradigm. We've totally shot ourselves in the foot, and everything we're dealing with now is as a direct result of that. We've got to get away from the password. This is the big problem, and this is the challenge which we must face, and we must grapple it. We can't be in denial anymore. We have to get rid of the password.
All right, let's put that point there to Keith Faz, as someone who chairs this select committee that is looking into things like this. Is that an area that needs to be looked at?
Absolutely, and what both Mr. Moon and Mr. Mars have pointed out is that they are technological experts. They know what they're talking about. You don't get into Parliament by being an expert in digital technology, unfortunately. And one of the problems is that the public is simply not aware of this. They are so delighted to get the new gadget and to be able to use the new gadget. They're so thrilled about being able to see the endless opportunities of the power and the force that the internet can give them, that they're not aware of how this can be breached. In the inquiry we did only recently on phone hacking, people didn't actually realise that most of them leave their phones on the default setting, so practically anybody was able to hack into their messages. It's first of all to do with awareness. The public is simply not aware that this might happen. They are so busy using the power of the internet, using Twitter and Facebook, searching on Google, putting data on their equipment. They simply aren't aware that this is going to happen. And Parliament certainly isn't aware of it. And I think this is a big failing on the part of legislators. We only catch up when something goes wrong. I mean, we needed people like Mr. Moon and Mr. Mars before my committee, rather than, in effect, some of the police officers and others who speak on the other side. And, you know, I hope both of them will be able to help us to come to some kind of conclusions on our inquiry. But the public don't know about it. Only last week I had a message from a senator in the United States who asked me to deliver €2,600 to a hospital in Belgium. And I, of course, immediately assumed this was true because he'd actually run out of money. It's only when I showed it to my 15-year-old daughter, she said, "He's been hacked and you're a fool," she said. Actually, this isn't happening. So the public only understand this is happening when it happens to them. And that is the big problem of the what is, in fact, the crime of the 21st century.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about people whose businesses' security are saying about all of this. The Director General of Britain's Security Service, MI5, has described cybercrime as a global threat to safety and security. Jonathan Evans said the extent of what is going on is astonishing, with industrial-scale processes involving many thousands of people lying behind both state-sponsored cyber espionage and organised cyber crime. US Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has warned how cyber attacks could have dangerous, more far-reaching consequences, what he called a cyber Pearl Harbor that would cause physical destruction and the loss of life, an attack that would paralyze and shock the nation and create a profound new sense of vulnerability. So pretty strong stuff there from two people in authority on this. But Keith Vaz, if I could go back to you on this, is there not a sense of alarmism about some of this? Are we blowing some of this out of proportion, do you think?
Absolutely not. I mean, as I said, when I started our inquiry into e-crime, I didn't know what we were going to expect. I have personally been absolutely shocked at the scale of what is happening. And I think that, I think it was Mr. Moon saying that actually this is only part of what is really happening in the outside world, because people don't want to shock us too much because we're legislators. I mean, the last thing that we need to do now is to be so overwhelmed by this that we do nothing. I think what we do need to do sometimes is to talk much more to the experts, because they actually know what is happening, and legislators do not do this enough. And they have the expertise. I think the statements by Leon Panetta and others are very, very helpful, because they remind us of what is going on, but actually we need to take effective action.
Jason Moon, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier about the fact that we need to take some of this with a grain of salt. When you hear these warnings from people like Leon Panetta and the head of Britain's MI5, is there a certain amount of scepticism that we should look at here as well?
Well, what they're talking about is asymmetric warfare, effectively, and so it is a threat. But we kind of forced the hand of our enemy, in a sense. So when we have this kind of attack against us, it's because we have massive military resources, perhaps who we're attacking doesn't. So we force them into using hacking. It's kind of like a form of guerrilla warfare. So we, in a sense, could be partly to blame. So it's more complicated than they make it out to be. But yeah, I do agree that there is a massive threat. There is a massive threat out there. But if I could just rewind and touch on one thing that the MP was saying, because he really struck on a valid point. We do need a public education programme. This is a big piece of the problem. I mean, think about it. You know how you had the Green Cross Code man, you know, telling kids when they cross the road they must look left and right, listen for traffic. When it's clear, then they cross, right? Because there's a new technology called cars. Everyone knows how to cross the road so you don't get hit by a car and killed. We need the same thing with the internet. We've got this massive technological boom. Everyone's online now, but you don't have fundamental training in how to use the internet safely. That should be in the curriculum. It really should. So people should know you never click on a link in an email to your bank. Things like that, just fundamental things to keep people safe. Because people are completely ignorant, shockingly ignorant. And the way password systems work as well, if we're going to use the password, it should be the law that systems have to be built so they won't even accept a password of 12345. That would eliminate 99% of the problem right there and then.
There's always going to be a level of ignorance, and how by the time you've taught people in schools how to avoid the current threat, and it's no bad thing doing that, the threats will change to adapt to that. And one of the biggest sources is people being tricked into doing things that we've touched on. So if you download a program from somebody else, that program has complete access to your PC and effectively your life. And if you've got a camera and microphone, they've got access to that. So one of the things of education is either teaching people to understand exactly what they're doing, but they're still going, even the best of us can still get caught by a nicely targeted, well-honed attack that appears to come from a friend, it ticks every box, everything looks right, you only have to not think for a second and you've clicked on the link, even if you think afterwards, oh, I should have done it. So the technological approaches are important, and at the moment the regulatory regime more takes an approach that says if you don't protect your system properly you can be prosecuted, but it very deliberately doesn't specify what you should do. And I think there's a big case to be made for actually saying every year we review cybersecurity, experts get together and say this is acceptable to protect passwords, this isn't acceptable. And if you follow this,
That's right.
you're obeying the law. And that needs to be a constantly updated thing, and it may even need extra powers for people like the Information Commissioner's Office or the other privacy experts in different countries to actually take active enforcement and audit systems, and that maybe can be part of financial audits for larger companies. But until we actively force companies to behave rather than prosecuting them only when they've stuffed up, I don't think very much is going to happen. There's also a problem. I've written to Keith Vaz's committee on this matter. I've suffered identity theft, nothing to do with actually having my computer hacked. It's more been data stole from company's house because I've been a company director. It is on a public register, and it takes very little data to name, address, date of birth is all you need to attempt to open credit. But I'm, like Mr. Vaz, we're not victims technically. So when his credit card was hacked, when people attempt to open credit in my name, it's the institution that's the victim. So although I've been gathering all the data, have information that may actually allow me to track down fees because it's happened more than once and I'm gathering data, the police aren't interested in any of it because I'm not technically the victim, and nor is Keith Vaz. So I would suggest that the subject of an attack under the law should be treated as a victim, as well as the institution that's actually being attacked. And that would allow people to take much more action, take things into their own hands, because at the moment you're pretty well impotent.
Keith Vaz, a flaw in the system that needs to be addressed?
A big flaw in the system, and I'm glad that Adrian has written into us. As I've said, I'm keen to have both of my fellow guests to give evidence to my committee before the inquiry is concluded. I think one of the problems is that we don't know what happens in the end. Adrian is quite right. I was reimbursed for the fact that somebody had set up a PayPal account in my name. I keep asking PayPal, will you tell me what happens at the end? Because they all said, oh, we'll find out who did this, and we'll know because we want to get our money back. But I still haven't been told who it was. So I think if you can inform people much more and tell us who's responsible, it will be much easier for us to operate. I like the idea that Jason has put forward of getting people to know when they have a piece of equipment. Maybe it should be on every PC to tell people about issues of safety. And I don't have, I mean, you know, I'm a dinosaur, so I wouldn't know what to do. But frankly, if we educate people more, then it makes a great difference. I'm not sure whether changes in the law will actually do this, because I believe that you would only institute legislation if you can then enforce it. And the trouble is, you'll need to have a lot of people enforcing it at a time of austerity and a decline in the number of police officers and other enforcement agencies. So I'd much rather see the kind of...
The argument, of course, which would take a fair bit of study, and it's worth looking at, is how much is it costing the country versus how much it would save the country.
Absolutely. And, I agree with you, Adrian. I think you're absolutely right. We should definitely look at the costs and benefits of doing something of this kind. But unless
I know
we
Jason
tell
Moon
the
wants to
public
chime in here as well. Go ahead, Jason Moon.
Yeah, just that, you know how you were saying about PayPal and stuff like that and costs. Costs would actually go down because a lot of the times these companies just write it off. It's cheaper for them to write it off than to find out who did it, whatever. So, you know, costs would go down if we can grapple this problem, banking charges and all this, because they hemorrhage the cash this way. They have all these charges would go down. And just touching back what was said before as well. I mean, again, we could. It's almost like we're kind of throwing water on the fire when actually we should be looking at what's causing the fire, what's actually the fire burning on. And again, it kind of goes back to this thing of the password. Imagine if you made a security system where it doesn't matter if they've got into your computer. You know how it was being said earlier, there's a program on your machine, it only takes one mistake to click a link or whatever. If we didn't have a password and you had, for example, a secure key fob system where you had a randomly generated number that you need to type in conjunction with your PIN code, that number expires after 30 seconds when you press the button. It doesn't even matter if your computer's hacked. If you've got 20 Trojans and viruses on your machine, you don't care because they can have your password, they can't do anything with it. So we can grapple this technologically and with education. We can do it. We have the knowledge, just needs the will.
All right, that's going to have to be the last word. We could certainly spend a lot more time talking about this, but unfortunately we don't have it. But I want to thank all three of our guests, Keith Vaz, Jason Moon and Adrian Mars, all in London. Thanks very much for your time, gentlemen. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. And you can watch this program and many others online, of course, at aljazeera.com. Bye for now.